Welcome, everyone. Today is March 10th, 2021. I'm Trey Dobson, Chief Medical Officer at Southwestern Vermont Medical Center and an emergency medicine physician with Dartmouth-Hitchcock Health. And this is Medical Matters Weekly, a show about the aspects of healthcare that matter to you most. You can submit your questions on Facebook Live, and we've also received some questions ahead of time at wellness@svhealthcare.org. And my guest today I'm extremely excited about is Dr. Michael Calderwood. He's the Chief Quality Officer and an infectious disease specialist at Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about him and then welcome him onto our show. Dr. Calderwood is a physician in the section of infectious disease and international health. He's actively engaged in the whole COVID response at Dartmouth-Hitchcock Health and actually in the states of New Hampshire and Vermont. He's a leading source of infectious disease information. He earned his medical degree at the University of Chicago School of Medicine in 2005, a residency in internal medicine at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, and then completed a fellowship in infectious disease in the combined Brigham and Women's Hospital, Massachusetts General Hospital program. He holds a Master's of Public Health from Harvard School of Public Health, and he's board certified in internal medicine and infectious disease. And I could keep going on, but Michael, thank you so much for coming and being on our show.
I appreciate the opportunity. I'm excited to have the conversation.
Great. So yeah, the people in this area are excited. They know Marie George well, and you work with Marie. And there, of course, many of the patients here and community members go to Dartmouth-Hitchcock for some of their advanced procedures and are excited about the relationship between SVMC and Dartmouth-Hitchcock, which is actually growing. And we hope to have more information about that over the next 12 months. So let's just start a little bit about you personally and just tell us where you grew up and a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I grew up in Massachusetts. I grew up in a suburb, Wellesley, Massachusetts, outside Boston. And I was there all the way through, actually, high school. My father is an infectious disease physician down in the Boston area. My mother, for many years, was a preschool director, although now is quote unquote retired, although I think she's busier in retirement than she ever was when I was younger. Does lots of outreach and great projects. And I have a brother that I grew up with. He did not go into science or medicine. He actually is a professor at University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, really with a great talent in languages, which unfortunately I don't have. It could have come in handy at times.
That's great. So you give him a call with language questions and he calls you about the pandemic and other infectious disease.
It does go that way, yes.
So because you grew up in that household with your father, is that how you went into medicine and then went into infectious disease, or did he stand back a little bit and let you come to that conclusion on your own?
You know, I think this is always the nature-nurture discussion. He did not kind of try to influence me unduly in any way. I was very interested in math and science. I think there were times I was interested in engineering and architecture. And then through college, as I really began to focus in on kind of studying science and really particularly interested in the impact that diseases have had on human history. I came out of college actually still not sure if I was interested in a PhD or an MD. And so I spent 2 years down at National Institutes of Health doing research on malaria. And it was really the combination of that experience as well as time working down in Brazil with the Ministry of Health on a disease called leptospirosis that got me excited about the clinical aspects. NIH has a great clinical center down there. And so getting to round with the physicians there, as well as the real world experience out of Brazil, really solidified for me that I was interested in the patient story and what we could do to impact that.
Wow, that's incredible. That's awesome. So do you speak Spanish?
Well, Brazil speaks Portuguese, and at one point I did speak Portuguese, and I have mostly lost it over the year. I will say that it most often comes up when I'm trying to speak Spanish, and I unfortunately slip in a Portuguese word, and people look at me sideways. But
right, okay, great. Well, thank you. That's so interesting. So when you're not doing medicine, then, because I know right now you're incredibly busy. I know that because I work with you, and you respond to me when I write you at 5 in the morning or at 10 at night. But tell me, what are you doing when you do have free time?
I think that the biggest thing for me has always been family. So I have two children with my wife, and we have one who's a ninth grader in high school and one who's a sixth grader in middle school. And really, one positive aspect about COVID is it allowed us to slow down. I think that many of us were always go, 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 and running to this sporting event or that. But it's really been focusing on how we can spend time and kind of support their interests. And a lot of those have developed even through COVID, which has been exciting to think about new opportunities for that. I'm a big hiker. I like to paint. I love music. And so, friends and I are always searching out new and obscure music and sharing that. I will say historically, I was a big fan of baking bread and beer, although that was not always the best for my gut. So I backed away from that a little bit.
That's great. Oh, it's great. So one of the questions that I had written down here, and that actually Ashley Jowett, who helps with the show, had written, is what one of the most memorable cases you've been involved with. I don't know if you've had time to think about that. I can tell you that as an emergency medicine physician, all of my top 5 most memorable cases are related to infectious disease, and I remember them so quickly, whether they were a tularemia case down in Memphis where I trained, or a necrotizing fasciitis type bacteria. So tell us about one of your most memorable cases.
So I did think about it, and I would agree that there's so many, and so one that comes to memory first is an interesting case that I was called into the hospital in the middle of the night because there was an individual that they thought might have malaria, and so really high fevers to 104 every day. And when I went in, I did the quick malaria smear, and it wasn't malaria. And it turned out that, well, this person had been a refugee and may have been in countries where malaria was endemic. They mostly had been in the United Arab Emirates, where there is no malaria. And so we started asking questions, and this person had a good story that fit brucellosis, which is a kind of obscure diagnosis, often from unpasteurized dairy products. And we always ask this question about unpasteurized dairy. So this person just kind of said, well, yeah, of course, I love milk, raw camel's milk directly from the camel. Now, this person had been in the country only a few months, but still was suffering from this that they had gotten at the market in the United Arab Emirates. Oh. And so it turned out that we could diagnose brucellosis. It took a little bit of time. It takes a while to grow in blood culture, and the antibodies take a while to come back. This person made a full recovery, but they went from having fevers every day to having months and months of therapy. But it's one of those obscure diagnoses. You don't expect someone to say, oh, of course, raw camel's milk. So that's always a memorable one.
That is a very memorable one. And for those in the audience that are interested in these types of cases, there's a lot of books that are actually specific on cases. And one that's great that does not seem like an infectious disease novel or actual nonfiction, but turns out to be, and that's The Lost City of the Monkey God. Have you read that?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, so we will, right before we move into COVID, I wanted to ask a little bit about your title and your responsibilities as the Chief Quality Officer. And by the way, congratulations, that's a new appointment for you. You've been doing in the associate position for a long time. But if you were going to talk to someone outside of healthcare, how would you describe not only your role as the Chief Quality Officer, but what quality means in a healthcare setting?
Well, I think that we all kind of come into medical school and learn the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm. And I think that, a lot of people, when they're coming to see a healthcare provider, are looking for answers and for healing. And there are lots of things that can happen through that process. And our goal, as we try to improve on a day-by-day basis, is really to make sure that we are kind of doing better in terms of achieving a diagnosis, improving outcomes, and also improving the experience that patients and their families have when they come into the healthcare setting. It can be a very stressful time, and a lot of people, were doing perfectly fine. All of a sudden this hits them like a lightning bolt, and they've got a new diagnosis. And we really want to be sure that we're not defining people by that diagnosis, but defining them by everything else that is critical in their life. And so when I think about quality, it's to make sure that we can get people in, provide them the best care possible, but get them back to their life where that is possible, and to allow them to live the fullest life in every case.
Well, that's a great answer, and probably not what people expected when I started off with that question. I love that, and I have to keep that in mind myself. Okay, so we will get into COVID. I'll ask you some questions, Michael, that we've actually had on the show before about vaccines and symptoms of COVID and what to do. But also, there's so much new information nearly every week. And so let's start with one of those. Can you just talk a little bit about your thoughts on the CDC guidelines that were supposed to be released last week, but came out Monday, I believe, and how you think those may affect us for the next month or two?
Yeah, I think that there's been a lot of reporting on the CDC guidelines, and at times some misinterpretation of what exactly they mean. So I'm glad we have an opportunity to clarify that a little bit. There's a wonderful kind of scientific page that goes along with the guidelines where you can read about why they're making the decisions that they are. And so a lot of this is really rooted in science that continues to evolve. What I will say is that we have thankfully been seeing cases come down, and depending on how you count things, and it's hit different parts of the country at different times, we really have had 3 waves of COVID. We kind of had the initial wave in April, and then that began to settle down. And then as we went past Memorial Day and into the summer, we had a second wave, and that hit different areas of the country. So if you thought of kind of New York's and Boston that were hit early on, now we were seeing the Midwest and the Southwest and the South. And then we had the fall period and into the winter, which was the 3rd wave. And that was really the wave that had the highest peak in terms of hospitalizations and deaths and diagnosed illness. And we're really seeing improvement. So I think there's a lot to celebrate, but there's also a lot of people being a little wary, because what we know is throughout the past year, we've learned that when we've backed off too quickly from some of the mitigation efforts that have been in place, that we've seen a resurgence. And so folks are concerned about not having a 4th wave hit before we get enough people vaccinated. And that's why you see this debate about what you can and cannot do. I think a good way of thinking about it is that over the next few months, we're going to be gradually turning the faucet back on. And it's not like a light switch. We don't turn this on and off. You need to take this in a stepwise approach, because that allows you to really see the impact and to back off if you see that things are going in the wrong direction. And so the CDC guidance that came out this week was really looking at what you could do if you're vaccinated. And it was very focused on what you do in your own private residence. It was not intended to impact things like restaurants or gyms. It was not intended, nor have states really adjusted to having this change what we do in healthcare settings. And so we're going to be doing a lot of the same things when you come into the clinic, when you come into the hospital. But in an individual home where you've got a small group, if you have everyone who's vaccinated, you can safely gather together and remove your masks and have a dinner party. They want for that to be really, maybe 2 groups coming together. The more people you have in that room, the higher the risk will be. It is said that if you have one group that is vaccinated and another that is not vaccinated, again, it can be done. This was really focused on, say, grandparents. We've been vaccinating a lot of grandparents who've been a year without seeing their family. They can gather with their loved ones. They can hug and kiss. They can make those choices. Again, the idea is you'd bring, a small group together with those people at any given time. You're not going to have a giant feast where you bring all the family members together at the same time. Again, because the more people you have in the room, the higher the risk. No vaccine is 100% effective. And then if there are people in the room that themselves have a predisposition to severe illness, someone, who has chronic lung disease or obesity or many of the other things that we kind of know are risk factors for more severe COVID illness, masks are still a personal choice. And in the home environment, it may actually be the best choice to wear masks, even if you're vaccinated, if you're worried that you have someone that would be at risk. And so I was just speaking with someone today who's fully vaccinated and has stopped wearing an N95, but really still feels comfortable with the mask and feels they're not ready. And I said, that again is a personal choice. You understand there are new variants out there. You understand that it's not 100%. You've made a choice to move from an N95 to a mask, but each person is going to kind of have this discussion and be in a different comfort level over the next few months. What I will say is if the numbers continue to go down, you will see that we start to see new guidance from the CDC about what can open up. So right now you can go to a restaurant, but you want to ask, does that restaurant have the tables distanced? Do they limit the number of people at each table? Do they have you wear a mask until you get to the table? All those things are evidence-based. And if the restaurant isn't doing those things, you want to think to yourself, maybe this isn't a place I want to be. You ask about movie theaters. A lot of movie theaters are opening, but they're spacing things out and having you kind of separate from other groups. It's difficult to run a business where you can't fill your seats. But right now that is the safest thing to do. So we'll get guidance as we go along. I will say things are reopening and we just need to keep a close eye on the numbers. I'm hopeful that we actually are at the point having vaccinated some of our most at-risk individuals, but we most certainly have not vaccinated a sufficient amount of the population to reopen everything. That's going to take getting kind of 8 times the current number of people vaccinated. We're just crossing 10% and we have to cross 80%.
Well, Dr. Calderwood, you say that so eloquently, and it is just great to hear. You also simplify it, and that's one of the problems we're seeing is that, first off, the CDC is doing what I believe is an excellent job now, a real turnaround in how they're communicating in a timely manner and the process by which they go about communicating with the public. But unfortunately, no matter how hard they try, it is complex unless you're someone like yourself or me or our colleagues who do this every day. And so the way you give that advice is perfect for them. It's recognizing unless there are barriers that we don't anticipate, that things will get more and more free. But doing so now could have unintended consequences for the whole country, but certainly for a region, and then slow down the pace of this recovery. And I like how you explain that you can have people over that are vaccinated. If there's unvaccinated people or people at high risk, that's when you need to be careful. And maybe it's just not time to do that yet until you get more people vaccinated. Speaking of that, I assume you're vaccinated?
So I am vaccinated. My wife is vaccinated. Our children are not, but our parents are. And so we are beginning to make plans for our grandparents to come up. We've been able to do that at times, kind of with masks and outside. It got a little harder through the winter months, but everyone's very excited to finally be able to visit. And so I've just been hearing from my father-in-law, and he's just counting the days till he can visit. And it'll be nice to. I won't say that we didn't sneak hugs now and again, but it'll be nice to really not have that same fear and to be able to have that interaction.
Absolutely. And then hopefully in this fall and winter, we can get the children vaccinated, which is something we can talk about later in the show if we have a little time. Let me move into the variants. You mentioned the variants. We've talked about that, the variants a few times on the show. And it's important to recognize that they're real and they do pose certain risks, but that also some of the information we heard earlier turns out not to be as scary as first talked about. And it was reported in Vermont, I think it was earlier this week or maybe late last week, of the first detection of the UK variant in Vermont. Of course, we know it's probably been here for a while. So do you have any comments on that and what people should be doing differently now with this news, if anything?
Well, we actually expected the UK variant to be the dominant variant in the United States by March. So the fact that it's just showing up, or at least detected for the first time in Vermont, kind of follows the pattern we were expecting. It does have a slightly higher degree of transmissibility. There's some debate about the severity of illness and whether it is less or equal or even slightly more than others. Depending on the paper you read, you'll find different things. What I would say is we have good data now that the current vaccines are actually effective against the UK variant. We have kind of post-market data on Pfizer out of Israel. We have data on the Janssen vaccine out of both the UK and South Africa against some of these variants, not just the UK one, but some of the ones out in South Africa and Brazil as well. So what we are particularly excited about is for severe disease. And so if we look at severe disease, meaning disease that would lead you to be hospitalized or to end up in an ICU or even to unfortunately die, these vaccines, any of the three, are actually quite effective against the most common circulating variants. It is possible that going into next fall, we may require a booster. And we know that respiratory viruses can mutate over time, and that's why we kind of get updates on our flu vaccine. There are kind of two reasons for that. Influenza vaccination tends to wane a little bit after about 9 months. And so that's part of the reason to get a booster. But the other is that there are new circulating variants or strains in any given year. And so you do need to update the vaccine. And we think that we'll probably get to a point where COVID is very similar.
Do you feel pretty confident that these pharmaceutical companies, in collaboration with the government and then as well as philanthropic organizations, are going to be able to create these boosters at a good pace and address some of the concerns with variants?
So, I mean, right now, what we know is that there are trials opening up where they're inserting a new piece of mRNA in targeting the variants, and that may be part of this booster arm that would go in the fall. So people are already beginning to look at that. The benefit of the mRNA vaccines as a novel technology is it's very easy to swap out one piece of messenger RNA for another. And so if you see that you need to make changes, so messenger RNA is read and creates a protein, which then can trigger your immune system to develop immunity. And so if that protein needs changes, you need to change the messenger RNA, you can kind of swap one out and the other in. The production issue is always going to be a challenge. And so messenger RNA vaccines are hampered a little bit in being able to scale up production. And so I think there's going to be an answer for kind of the developed world. But my bigger concern right now actually is this issue that disease anywhere is disease everywhere. And we're not going to put this issue to rest until we have really vaccinated a large portion of the global population. And right now, that's where we're struggling. You know, we have encouraging data on the number of vaccines and when we'll be able to get to herd immunity here in the United States. We have other countries that have bought massive amounts of vaccine. But then you've got large areas, like many areas in Africa, where they're struggling to get things started. And so we really need to think about this not being a country by country effort, but a global effort. And that's going to be critical to end this pandemic.
I totally agree. Maybe adding a little bit of commentary quickly. It's right for us to make sure we can get our population vaccinated so that we are healthy then to go out and do what our country has done such a good job of, and that is help other countries in need. Yes, there are times when we haven't done that, but this is an opportunity to really shine. It's sort of like pulling down the oxygen mask in a plane, putting it on yourself first, but then going ahead and addressing the concerns around the world. So I hope, I know that in medicine, we all want to be a part of that. We all want to see it happen. As we're gonna wrap up, because one of the goals of this show is to keep it within 30 minutes so that people can get a good quick listen. I'm going to ask two more quick questions. Can you just make some comments? We do have these three choices in vaccines, and no matter how much we talk about it or how much the New York Times or the Washington Post write about it, people still have questions. Can you just comment, especially on Johnson & Johnson, just because it's the newer of the three?
Yeah, and so I think that really, I've been vaccinated, and so I received the Moderna vaccine. That was the one that was available on the day that I went in. I think that each vaccine has slightly different data and was studied at slightly different times. But actually, if you compare them, they actually are quite comparable. They're quite comparable in terms of the side effects, and these are kind of typical side effects that we see as you develop immunity. You're going to have a sore arm. Some people may have fever and muscle aches, very short-lived, and they tend to resolve in a day or two. And then in terms of their effectiveness, they've really been looking at different things. And so people will hear 95% and 90% and 62%, and depends on the country where it was studied and the variant that was going around. But I think what you really want to focus in on is what is the effectiveness in keeping you out of the hospital and keeping you from getting very ill. And so what really excites me about the Johnson & Johnson, or what others are referring to as the Janssen vaccine, um, is that it really was around 85% effective in multiple countries, including in Brazil, in Africa, where they had predominance of strains or variants that we actually were concerned might cause issues with lower effectiveness of these vaccines. And this vaccine continued to be quite effective in preventing people from being hospitalized, ending up on kind of a ventilator, and really did not have any deaths in the arm where people got vaccinated. So it is a very good vaccine. The other benefit is you only need one shot. So you don't need to come back in 3 to 4 weeks for that second shot. And so it's not comparing apples to apples. At the same time, we need to get, millions of people vaccinated, hundreds of millions of people vaccinated. When it is your turn, I would say that you should feel comfortable getting any of the vaccines that have been approved. We currently have 3 that have been approved. I've looked at the data on all 3, and I would roll up my own sleeve and get the shot for any of them. And I've spoken to my own family about that. They've asked this question of, well, should I get one versus the other? And the answer is no, you should get the one that's available. And it is really everyone's responsibility, as long as they don't have some significant contraindication, to really step forward and get vaccinated. We aren't going to get out of this pandemic until we get over 80% of our population vaccinated. These are very safe, very effective. And the fact that we have 3 of them within a year of this new disease being identified is incredible. I mean, this is comparable to us sending someone to the moon. It really was our moonshot. And the scientists who got behind this, there are going to be books written about it. This is an incredible story.
Well, that is just great the way you've said that. I have to remember some of those quotes. It's awesome. I also just say that I'm so happy to see that at least up in Vermont and New Hampshire, all 3 vaccines are really being readily accepted. We're vaccinating educators and some other professions in Vermont now, and we're going to be starting here in Southern Vermont on Saturday with the Johnson & Johnson, and the clinics have been just signed up immediately and full. I have to say, I totally agree with you too. If today I was getting vaccinated and I actually had a choice, I don't think I could choose, because there's really no choice. It's just give me one. Perhaps I'd go with the Johnson & Johnson just so I wouldn't have to come back for that reason, but no advantage there. Well, I'm going to finish with a question that's near and dear to my heart. I am a huge Alabama football fan because that's where I'm from originally. I did not go to school there. I did not play football there, but I definitely follow the football team, which of course is easy to do right now. It's harder to do in other times. Can I go to a game this fall, or actually I should say, should I go to a game this fall in a packed stadium?
So I think the question was actually asked to me, would I be buying tickets? And I think as a diehard fan, you absolutely should be buying tickets. I think that we will, it's really hard none of us have a crystal ball. I think we're very hopeful that we'll be at a point next fall that we will be able to do a lot of these things that we kind of feel are normal, going to large sporting events. So I am planning as if that will be possible, thinking about what sorts of vacations one might take at that time, and what you could do in larger crowds. So I would say I'm hopeful. At the same time, it depends. If things are different and the community transmission rates are such in the fall that it's not safe, we have to be ready to kind of pivot. But I'm hopeful that we'll be in a much different spot come fall of 2021.
Oh, that's great. Great answer. I'm going to buy my tickets today. Thanks, everyone, for joining us on Medical Matters Weekly. I'd like to thank our guest, Dr. Michael Calderwood from Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center, as well as Mike Cutler from CAT TV, Ray Smith from Southwestern Vermont Healthcare, and Ashley Jowett, also from Southwestern Vermont Healthcare. I'm Trey Dobson. Go out and find joy in everything you do, even in the face of adversity, and we'll see you next week.